Good afternoon. Welcome to the New York State ASBO webinar. Dot the I's, cross the T's, purchasing laws, regulations, and required policies. My name is Matthew Darius. I'm the Professional Development Coordinator here at ASBO. I'll be moderating today's call. If you have any questions at any time, please feel free to type it into the chat window. Or if you want to ask our presenter a question, feel free to hit 7# on your phone. That'll notify me as the moderator that you want to speak, and then I'll break in and you'll be able to talk. Our presenter for today is Angela Pierce, and she's been doing this many years, so she's going to be a great presenter for today. Angela, take it away.
Thank you very much, Matthew. Good afternoon, everybody. Today we're going to be speaking about dotting the I's and crossing the T's, those purchasing laws and regulations, and required policies that make the purchasing system run the way it's supposed to run. I can tell you from not only my experience, but I'm sure in your own districts and BOCES that there's a lot that goes into purchasing. There's a lot to kind of get the grasp on and get information so that you're doing it and performing it in the way that meets the standards and also meets the regulations that you have in your own districts and the policies that you have in your own districts. What we're going to try and do this afternoon is go through some of those most important areas of demonstration of the laws and regulations and policies. And then I'd like to also point you in the direction of those sources and resources that we have as purchasing people to allow us to get more information and try and get the most up-to-date information we can possibly get. So moving along, let's talk about purchasing laws. Purchasing laws come from all over the place. We've got several New York State laws, education, general municipal, labor, and finance. There are court decisions that become, they have the force of law, so they become a methodology by which we need to practice. Opinions of the New York State Comptroller, opinions of the New York State Commissioner of Education. Court cases, again, are going to test what's on the books and give us some kind of feedback as to what needs to be done in certain situations. The Office of the State Comptroller certainly has been doing many, many audits during the past few years, and audit findings, while they may not all carry the weight of law, do have the importance of being those kinds of directions and guidelines that we want to fulfill. And of course, the Board of Education Policy. That's a great regulator in how it's handled in your own district. In terms of competitive bidding, the rationale under New York State law is to allow for this safeguard that would require that items or groups of items which exceed a bidding threshold be bid. Sorry about that. Be bid, and we're going to go into some of the details on how that happens. Education law 1725, which is interesting. This is not general municipal law, which governs so much of bidding in general. This law really talks about how to deal with school districts and leases. And leases is a topic that's going to come up in other areas of the law. And I just pointed out because people should be aware that no leases for personal property should be in excess of one current school year. That means when you bid something or when you have a lease, you're not supposed to have the lease continuing into the future unless that lease has been approved by the voters of the district as a separate proposition. Lease purchase agreements of instructional equipment must actually even have prior written approval by the Commissioner of Education. That's not to say that leases are not going to be bid because they're required to be bid under this law, but there are also going to be some ways that those leases are going to be impacted upon by additional information under General Municipal Law 5A 109B. General Municipal Law 103 is the guidance for all bidding for New York State, for all political and non-political entities. And by non-political, I'm talking about those that, like school districts and fire districts, that are part of the New York State governmental area, but are not a political entity per se. Those tenants under General Municipal Law 103 provide definitions for monetary thresholds and exceptions to competitive bidding. They describe in detail the requirements for purchase of the goods and commodities, as well as for services. And that's where we're talking about public work type items, building and construction trades, and we'll be talking a little bit more about that as we go into more detail about how those differences between purchasing commodities and services become more important. Details the advertising requirements and procedures necessary for legal bidding compliance. I want to point out now the next item is a very, very useful website that I'd like to point people to. It is the New York State General Municipal Law Internet Access site. It is also the site that has information on any of the New York State laws. So if you're trying to find out some information on a particular subdivision of the law, you can go to that website and be able to find specifically what the law says. I found it very, very valuable, and it hasn't been all that long that it's been up and running. So thank you, New York State, for that. Underlying principles for competitive bidding. Really, these are the main thrusts: to give all recognized and responsible vendors equal opportunity in furnishing supplies and equipment and services to the district, to prevent favoring one vendor over another. That's the law is trying to prevent us from going and tapping one of our good friends and saying, hey, do me a favor, which is always a concern in the purchasing realm. You want to make sure everything is totally above board, and you are an agent for the district dealing with issues that affect taxpayer money. To keep district residents informed on business matters pertaining to schools. Yes, you're using their money, so you are of extreme interest to people who are your residents because they want to make sure you're managing their money appropriately. And not the least of which is to prevent fraud on the part of the purchasing official. And when it says purchasing official, I do take that to mean not only the person who is purchasing agent, but the people who are feeding into that person so that person becomes the gatekeeper for all things that are happening with the purchasing dollars. However, General Municipal Law 103 also provides some areas where there would be exceptions to competitive bidding, and we're going to be going over some of these in great detail, if not in this session, in subsequent sessions. The New York State and county contracts have a powerful and great number of different areas where someone who is subject to bidding would be able to access a New York State contract or a county contract in the state and be able to, under the guidelines of those two areas, be able to purchase from them directly, sometimes called piggybacking, and buy from them without going out to bid yourself, thereby recognizing a number of savings of time and dollars in many cases, but not all, but in many cases saving dollars so that you don't have to go out and bid yourself. Then, of course, there's emergencies, and this exception to competitive bidding for emergencies does not mean that you do not attempt to get the best price, but it does mean that you do not have to go out to a formal bid with formal legal advertisement and the time that it takes to get all of that kind of work done, because there is a true emergency. And a true emergency is not, oh, gee whiz, I forgot to order these books and I need them 3 days from now. A true emergency is you had a fire in a building, a roof caved in, the ice melted and created water damage, and now you are out of supplies or the use of a part of a building or that sort of thing. And under those issues, you want to be able to acquire whatever you need to put yourself back into the running with compliance with the rules as best you can. Surplus and secondhand supplies, materials, and equipment. That's an area where you might have extra music equipment that is still available, and you want to purchase them from another school district. You'd be able to without going out and putting together a formal bid. That has to be looked at because you need to be able to make sure you're doing that under very specific guidelines and that your Board of Education is part and parcel of what's going on there. Intergovernmental cooperative agreements have become much more in favor lately as more New York State political entities and subdivisions are trying to find ways to be able to get together to actually pool the resources to buy things. When people are buying things in a larger group, the theory is that the quantities will increase, and therefore everyone will be will be able to get a better price because all of these items are now being bid in a larger group. As the State Comptroller's Department has become more invested in, and New York State government in general, more invested in having us use money very, very effectively as money has started to become a little bit less bountiful. This has been really kind of suggested by the Office of the State Comptroller in a number of occasions to help people get more for their money and to effectively use taxpayer dollars. Food and milk purchases by school districts is exempt, but I think just because something says it's an exception doesn't necessarily mean you can't. It doesn't necessarily mean you can't bid something or find ways to get the best price you can if you're doing quotes. And we're going to go over the strategies of why one method works better in some circumstances than others. Municipal hospital purchases are exempt, and just recently, federal GSA contracts, in particular Schedule 70, the 1122 programs, technology programs, are particularly targeted for accessibility by the state and political subdivisions. And there will be more information that comes down. But it's a very specific guideline because, excuse me, so many times vendors will knock on the door and say, hey, I've got a GSA contract, and I know you can use a state contract. I know you can use a county contract. What would be better than being able to use a federal contract? And the reality is we are just not legally allowed to use federal contracts without there being as specific as this now talks about allowance for us to access something. One of the things that I think everybody should really realize as they're looking into the laws and what governs purchasing is that it's not a situation where if they don't say it, it's okay. It's actually the opposite. If it's not in the law to allow you to do something, then you really shouldn't do it. And there's going to be lots of ways to test that strategy. Many times you already found in your district that you've already kind of tripped on something that points you in that direction. Some more of the exceptions to competitive bidding, professional services, and we've heard a lot about these. And I apologize. I see I've listed them twice. That's how important they are. Professional services can run from people who do, for instance, the lawyers in the district, people who audit the district, people who create computer systems for a district. All of those professional services are something that are so specific to what your needs are that it would be very difficult to put out a bid and award something to the person who has the least amount of money that would go into it. Sometimes it entails bringing up information about how they would find a solution to a particular issue that you're having, how they would handle your files in a transition. And so what this really is talking about, and details later on, is that you want to be able to find some methodology for dealing with professional services, especially those that are very appropriate in different places, like attorneys or auditors, where every school district on the face of the earth in New York is actually looking for an auditor. You would be able to then put out a request for quotation, for instance, which is another purchasing device, not a true bid. True leases, licenses, and concessions are also exceptions to competitive bidding. Another issue that we find out there as an exception is sole source. There again, when we're talking about sole source, we're saying that there is no other place in the universe that you can buy this. So it doesn't mean that a textbook necessarily is sole source. If you can buy it at this bookstore over here and that bookstore over there, and so on and so on. There are different ways to approach buying certain kinds of things like textbooks. For instance, there is a very, very viable New York State contract that has been helpful in the past. But sole source is not this general term that you're the only person on in this particular county that offers it. So you have to be very careful to document that something is sole source by its very nature. And then there's a very interesting category that's been here for many, many years called preferred sources. Of course, preferred sources, like the New York State contracts, that's preferred because now, again, the theory is that we're using a very large resource, the state of New York, that is funneling all of their purchases of a particular commodity. In most cases, this is a commodity, through the New York State Office of General Services. And theoretically, you should find the best price you can find for X volume of whatever you need. And that works very well in a number of cases. In some cases, I know it's been my past history in a few cases that I've found that sometimes it is better to bid it out yourself. It really depends on what it is. If it's a single line purchase, you might want to throw out a bid and see if this is something that's going to save your taxpayers some money. In other cases, time may be of the essence, and you need to find something fairly quickly, and this is certainly a viable alternative that allows you to go out and purchase something in a fairly short amount of time without all the timing of putting out bids and getting bids to boards for approval and cutting POs, which can eat up months of time. County contracts, of course. County contracts are approved under Section 103, Subdivision 3, and have been modified recently. So we will be talking some more about the modifications that county contracts have seen that allows us even more access to them and therefore gives us a better resource for finding things that we want to be able to handle through a piggybacking mechanism instead of trying to do the whole Megillah ourselves. Now, the next few items under sole source are items that are theoretically you should be doing first before you even put out a bid. And I'm going to go through them, and I'm going to talk about the pros and cons of it. Core Craft, of course, our state correction division, they really do make more than license plates. They have a very, very viable, very high line group of items in furniture, in file cabinets, in chairs, and tables, and student desks. There's some place that you should look for alternatives. The reality is that you need to check into things that will affect your district, for instance, time of delivery, because on all of these next industries and core craft items, you might find that there may be a problem with accessing them, and you want to document that only because of your needs and how you have to handle it for your particular purchasing department. The New York Industries for the Disabled, a preferred source under State Finance Law, Section 175A, is an area where you can buy directly from the New York State Industries for the Disabled and therefore not have to bid out these items. You'll find there are various things. There's custodial supplies to a certain extent, very small extent in that area, but there are some. There's pencils and general office supplies. And again, if you can meet the terms of what they require, which is usually fairly large packaging, and that's okay for your delivery if you have a situation where you have a centralized warehouse or someplace where you can take in that information, in those goods, that would be absolutely a wonderful place to look into. Industries for the Blind of New York State, where they actually have more custodial type supplies, mops, brooms, cleaners, that sort of thing. You have the opportunity there to be able to see if you can find something there that will meet your requirements. Again, with all three of the ones that I've just mentioned, there is a procedure you need to go through to make sure it works for you, because if it doesn't, and you can also see that their prices are at least 15% higher than what you would pay yourself, you might want to rely on your own bids or your own local sources or a state contract if that seems like it's appropriate. But in reality, the law says you should be going here first. And I'm having a little problem with seeing my last lines here, so I'm going to see if I can cut something out to see better.
Yeah, your computer selection or connection might be a little bit slow.
It's actually just my screen. I'm just trying to see if I can make this a little bit larger so I can read it without having to go to another source.
Oh, yeah, there's no way to make that bigger on your screen.
Okay.
We're moving to different software next semester. That'll be a whole lot better.
Okay. Matthew, can you read that? Because I can't tell what the last line is from. I know it says something, but I can't see it.
Which was the last one you left off on?
Under Industries for the Blind of New York State.
Yeah, it's actually cut off on mine too.
Okie doke.
Let me pull up the handout here.
I'll fix it for the next time you might use this.
Yeah.
Well, for those of you who can read that, that's another preferred source.
It's actually cut off on the handouts too.
That's interesting. Okay. We'll go back to that, and I'll get you the information as to exactly what that is. Well, actually, let me see if I can do that right now.
It's cooperative purchasing, GML Section 119.
Okay, thank you very much. And yes, cooperative purchasing is another area that has, as I said before, received a lot of interest because the theory is that the more you get people together and you do it on a larger scale, the better the prices are. Now, interestingly enough, with all the great stuff that there is in GML 103, many years ago they came up with another concept because they want to be able to focus in on what happens when you don't go out to bid. Is everyone using a rational, purposeful methodology for being able to buy things that are getting quoted in a way that saves the district money and makes sure you're doing it an unethical way, And so they came up with GML 104. That requires that political subdivisions create a procurement policy and a procedure for how they purchase all the goods that are not subject to the competitive bidding law. It requires that you include the procedures for using the preferred sources, because those are a viable methodology for buying when you're not buying at the threshold. And allows for a written determination of the dollar thresholds for the use of verbal or written quote procedures. It gives you, or it should give you, if your policy is written the right way, a way of documenting the number of vendors contacted, their address, telephone, fax information, unit pricing, and delivery costs, because all of these pieces of information are part of the documentation requirement of 104. And as you're doing that, you will find that, and most of these, if not all of them, should have been established years ago. They will have a reference to the monetary categories that will differ from based on what it is that you're actually working with. For instance, a service or public works contract is not going to be the same as a purchase contract in terms of what your needs are, because the thresholds are different. When you go out to bid at the $20,000 purchase contract threshold, you need to make other quotation limits different, because you want to be able to make it reasonable for your entity. So, for instance, if everyone looks back at their own policies, they'll see perhaps from $500 to $2,000, you're going to be just doing a verbal quote, i.e. calling 3 people on a telephone, finding out the price for whatever you're looking for, and then making decisions based on the lowest price or the lowest price that you can acquire if you have a requirement that you need it right away and delivery can't be made right away. Then the next level of threshold may be $2,001 through $10,000, and there you're going to do a written quote, but you're going to only solicit up to 3 vendors and get their pricing for the items. Then your next threshold, and again remembering that the total, that the bidding threshold is $20,000, is you might have from $10,001 to $19,999, and there you're going to require that any pricing that's done is with 4 written quotes, and that you are looking at all that information to make sure it meets the guidelines that you need. I've included here a sample quote form, which is something I developed years ago to help me put this information into one nice place. And that's what was asked of policymakers in that time, to be able to get those documents put together so that you would be able to look at it, you'd be able to make a cogent analysis of it, and more than that, you'd be able to pass it along as part of your purchase order documentation to other people who are going to be reviewing the information in your packet. For instance, your internal auditors and your auditors who are looking at your are appraising your payments, and even the state controller's auditors and your external auditors. So all of these people who might want to see how did you come to this decision can see it in one nice, neat little place. Now, if you decide in reviewing all this information that you really don't want to allow it to be awarded to the person who is the lowest bidder or quoter in this case, you have to justify and document that, and a form, you can write on there why you needed something in 2 weeks. You asked everybody about their delivery time frame, and in fact this person can't get it until 3 weeks from now, even though they're low. The decision was made to go with the next highest quoter because you needed the goods right away, or within the time frame that you can specify. And I would think at this point, as we've been going through these slides and as I've been talking, many of you are starting to see that although there may be some hard and fast rules on purchasing that are existent, you really have a lot of judgments that come in on a daily basis, on a case-by-case basis, about exactly how you're going to handle something, exactly how you're reviewing something, how you're analyzing something. Because that's another very big mainstay of purchasing, is the analysis and getting all of these pieces to work for you so that you are buying the best for the lowest price, and everybody should be happy with that. In this policy, also, you must indicate the individual responsible by name and title who does purchasing for the entity. So you get to have your name in a district policy. That, of course, will change if somebody else takes on that responsibility. But this policy does require that the governing board solicit comments and procedures from those people involved in procurement, and asks that it be an annual review and that it be approved on an annual basis. And I've seen that done in districts I've worked in, usually at the reorg meeting at the beginning of the year. But it can be at other points, especially if there's been a change to the policy and something's been added or deleted or modified in some way. This is a copy of this form that I mentioned. It was done in Excel. It basically asks for who's doing the quotes. That may not always be the purchasing agent. That may be other people on his or her staff. It may be people in departments. So I just added another line that said what department is this coming from, because you do want to be able, if you have a question, to be able to get back to the person who did the quote. And then it provides here room for 4 vendors. I use this form not only as a verbal quote form where you're calling a vendor up. You may have, I don't know, you want to buy 100 boxes of trash liners of a particular size and nature. And you write that into the item description, and then you call 3 or 4 companies, depending on how much you anticipate the monetary threshold to be. And you indicate who you spoke to, the phone number, the date that you spoke to them. If I'm getting faxes, I also use this form to compile the information in faxes so that it's all on one piece of paper. No one's rifling through paper trying to determine how you made your decision. I also found that it was very helpful when other people were providing the information, a school, a facilities department, people who were trying to aid in the process of the purchasing, that they would comprise this information, and then I'd be able to, I or my staff would be able to look at it and then make sure that it seemed like it was accurate. We would test some of the numbers, make sure that they added together, and that the true low quoter, if that's what we're going for, is indeed the person who is getting awarded the contract. I don't want to mislead anybody. There are times that it would be appropriate to not award to the lowest quoter, but by and large, most of the time, the low quoter got it. Because, again, we were trying to find the best price for whatever we were looking for, whether it was EpiPens or trash liners. We wanted to find some place where we could get a good deal and be able to award and use those taxpayer monies as best we could. And this is under the proviso that there wasn't already an existing contract out there. You're not going to go and do a quote on something that you already have a contract in place that you can buy further items from. Now, we were talking before about the concept of the thresholds for bidding. This slide now moves from sections 103 and 103B and talks more about changes that we have seen in the very recent past. There's a lot of changes to the law that have come about in the last 2 years. The changes to the actual bidding thresholds. purchasing contracts changed in 2009 to 20,000. I'm sorry, purchasing contracts changed in 2011 to 20,000, and the contracts for public works changed to 35,000 in 2009. But there's always a concern, and this was something that came up very recently, to make sure people understood how you get to those thresholds. The way you get to a threshold is you have to take the items that are being asked to be purchased and look at it in a time frame. It's not, oh, gee, I need 15 dozen pencils today. It's, I need to know what I need in terms of pencils for the entire total of the year. Now, in the past, that year was always understood to be the fiscal year, so that July 1 of a certain year in a school district, you knew that if you needed 100 dozen pencils for the entirety of the year, you needed to add that to the rest of the general supplies you were buying for the district, and that total amount over $20,000 would be bid. Then if you had smaller purchases that came through afterwards, you'd have to look at what your resources were. And if you needed to do a quote, you would do a quote, but you had to anticipate that it wasn't a quote for another 10 dozen, it was a quote for whatever got you to the end of that school year. Now, in order to determine that a purchase is an expenditure within the discretionary threshold amounts, you need to reasonably expect an aggregate total of all purchases in those commodities to be made in a 12-month period commencing on the date of purchase. That is a change, and that's an interesting change because that's not as clear-cut as your fiscal year, because your fiscal year you can look and see your budget and say, hey, that's X number of dollars. Your 12-month period is kind of an interesting way to look at that. But that's what they've modified it to do, and I'm sure people are trying to do the best they can to make sure that their purchases are being looked at with as much advance notice as possible so that they're not making the mistake, really, of not bidding something that should have been bid. And that's, again, a judgmental situation where you're going to need to look into what will save you from the potential of there being an issue. And many times the answer comes back, put it out to bid, and that way you're kind of preserved for whatever eventualities or questions may come up. Again, people, and I've dealt with this many times, and I'm sure many people out there have heard this, where someone will come up to you and say, oh, but I only need 5 for this school and 10 for that school, and that's not $20,000. Well, let me give you another school and another 10 for that school. Well, you can't artificially divide whatever you're trying to buy, whether it be commodities or services or technology, to avoid the competitive bidding process. You can't just buy it for the high school and then a month and a half later say, oh, I'm going to buy it for my middle school at the same amount, and all of a sudden you go over the $20,000 threshold. That's always been true, and there have been many people who like to see if there are ways that they can make that not be true, but the bottom line is it is true, and it always has to be looked at, and the attempt has to be made with your best abilities to be able to find out whether there is something else coming down that pike. Or, if it does come down the pike, stop it and bid it there, because, you know, there's 100,000 things going on in every day, and although we may ask the right questions, we may not get the right answers. And so if someone tells you, oh, no, this is the only time we're going to buy trash liners and we're never going to have another purchase again, when that comes up in a month and a half, it would be good to be able to remember that you did it the first time and look into where we're at in terms of bidding it. Sometimes people will have the necessity for something of a change order purpose, something that was unanticipated has to be done in order to complete the job or complete the purchase or whatever it happens to be. And that my third bullet here is talking about you need to be aware of what you did already, as I said a minute ago, so that you know that you don't go over the bidding threshold, so that you catch it and at that point bid. And I know that I had many, many instances in my career where people would tell me, oh, I'm just buying a little bit more sand-salt mixture. That one towards the end of a season might have got by me. And then they needed to buy more. And we were faced with having to find ways to be able to comply with the law in doing that. And many, many, many circumstances where that came up. Another recent change to, and this is Section 103 also, is electronic submissions. And that's going to keep coming up as we get more technologically savvy and our vendors get more technologically savvy. It authorizes that the statement of non-collusion, which is an important document, we're going to be talking about that some more in a little while, be submitted in electronic format now. That didn't used to be true. As long as the Board of Education has authorized the receipt of sealed bids in electronic format. The thing you have to be careful with electronic bids is you don't want to exclude potential bidders, so that if you have some people who can do electronic submissions and some people who can't, you really have to be able to handle both, except on the next bullet where it does talk about local governments now being able to, or school districts being able to mandate that technology contracts, and only technology contracts, be submitted in electronic format. So that means in that case, you're going to be able to ask your technology contract vendors, who I would say would probably be up there with the most savvy of the technological groupies that exist, would be able to then give you a complete electronic format submission. And you still need to be able to do whatever's necessary to make sure you've got other parts of the law dealt with, that everything is not able to be seen, that you are safeguarding the bids so that you're receiving what is, in effect, sealed bids in electronic format, which has been a long issue before now. So there are programs that allow you to take, that have a program that allow you to take the bids in and open them at a certain time. But they're far and few in between. Another change here to Section 102 of Article 5A is deposits on plans and specifications. In the past, whenever you put out a bid specifically on architectural designs where there was an architect involved and you had a bid for a capital improvement of some sort, you were allowed to charge for a deposit on the plans and specifications. However, if the vendors who responded gave you back the plans and specifications, in other words, this big packet of paper, you needed to refund them their deposit. Here, now the requirement for deposit is no longer required. The reality is they're not paying for, normally they're not paying for this material. They're kind of putting a deposit to try and show that they are truly interested in preparing a bid for you. It's kind of a way to keep people who are not interested, not capable, from not taking the paperwork and running away with it. The payment for who's making the copies, usually the architect bills the originator and they pay for it. So, as I say, they're not paying specifically for the paper. They're paying to prove they're a good vendor. And another change to 103.1-B under Article 5A is, again, that piggybacking, they call it, of certain GSA contracts. And really it's such a small amount, it's really only where, and again, it has to be something that's going to benefit you. If it's not going to benefit you financially or in some way in terms of the way the contract's are written, there's no reason for you to even be, accessing it. Another section upgrade on 104C under Article 5A. It allows the donation of surplus computer equipment to public schools, public libraries, and other public and private institutions for secular education use and for not-for-profit institutions for use by individuals with disabilities, senior citizens, and low-income individuals. That's now new. Does require a resolution from the governing board. This is one of my favorites because this was a very, very long time coming. For many, many years, it originally you could, as when 103 was first created, you could buy off of a county contract in the county that you geographically existed in. And that was great. You had access to a county that, might be doing some purchasing of those kinds of purchases that you needed, like paper. Paper was a great thing. If you were having a problem with your paper vendor and you could buy it off the county contract, that was a great thing, especially if you had something that was unusual or in a pinch. Then a change had come to that article, and they had extended it so that you could buy from adjacent counties, which was great. I mean, not everywhere in the state would you have more than one, but you would have at least one more county to go to. Then they still looking at that county contract concept, and again, this move towards wanting to have cooperative purchasing and purchasing that was based on larger contracts. Another change was made that you could buy from any county in New York State. And the only thing that really tripped up a lot of purchasing people was there were sometimes instances where there might be a county contract that would be for a public works. And the theory there was that you really couldn't use that because at one point public work contracts were, the Labor Department was issuing prevailing wage attachments that were very, very specific to a certain town, to a certain very small location. That wasn't necessarily the county. That now has been broadened, and here particularly, this now authorizes the use of county contracts that are subject to Article 8 prevailing wages, and now lets people piggyback off of them. And that's kind of handy for a number of things that school districts are involved in doing that are not necessarily even big jobs, but may be something that would, with a fairly quick access of a county contract, save them a whole lot of aggravation and time and money over the course of time, because now again the county has really pre-qualified a vendor because they have awarded to their lowest bidder. There is a very specific proviso in there, though, that the county has in their paperwork that they are allowing this political subdivision to actually access the contract. Because without that, then this really doesn't tie into the piggybacking concept. I'm going to also mention something about piggybacking because you probably will hear that in lots and lots of ways, piggybacking on cooperative bids. You can't piggyback on an already existent cooperative bid. You need to be able to deal with oops. Sorry guys, I just pressed a button and lost my presentation, so bear with me for just a second.
I still see it on my screen.
Yeah, I'm sure it's there. I just hit something and didn't mean to hit. Okay, I'm not in. Matt, I didn't sign out, but it's telling me that nothing's currently published or shared. Is there another way to get in?
It shows me you're still in the webinar. Let's see. Now, did you close your window?
Let me see. Okay. Okay, I got it back.
Okay.
Got it back, thank you. What I was trying to do, which is what caused me to do that, is I lost the window on people, but I've got that back now too. Okay, so I don't have that back now. Oops, I have a little technological problem here.
How about now?
I see me, and it says all participants. Okay, I think I'm good. Let me just, but I'm at the beginning of the presentation, so let me bring it back to where I was. That's See what happens when they let people retire.
Oh, it's not that bad.
Okay, so now we're back to now it's telling me I have an error. Okay.
Everything looks good on my end.
Yeah, it threw me out of it.
Oh boy. All right, let's try this again.
It no longer likes me. All right.
All right.
Now I've got the presentation. I do not have any people.
How about now?
I have people, but I don't have my list of. Okay, now. Better. Thank you, Matthew.
You're welcome.
Okay. Section 103.15 authorizes any political subdivision with a population over 50,000 to pre-qualify bidders on a public works contract and to limit bidding to those pre-qualified bidders. And that's an interesting concept, and it'll be interesting to see how people are using that. And I really am not going to talk a lot about that because it really is something is very particular to a need, and I'm not quite sure who's using it. Now, the next slide, I hope, is really useful to everybody because in the process of doing purchasing, there are certainly going to be times where there may be a webinar or some training, but there are some actual documents that have been put out by SED, and that's the State Education Department, and the Office of the State Comptroller that are wonderful documents that can give you a lot of insight into exactly what's going on and how to practically use these. So I thought I would put some information in here, very particularly leading you to these documents on the Internet so that people would have an opportunity to download them and to start to look at them before we even got into a lot of the process of how purchasing works so that you would have this opportunity to see what kinds of things are being tapped. And one of them is the Purchasing Handbook that has been existent for many years, is updated by State Education Department, and can be located at that website, that URL that I have down there. It is extremely detailed about all sorts of things that go on in the purchasing realm, and I think everybody who hasn't read it should absolutely read it. I think it's a great tool. There's also a couple of other areas where there's some information that SED has put up there on site, and purchasing tips, cooperative purchasing, and the lease purchase of instructional equipment are three of those. And those are very short. The Purchasing Handbook's got some meat to it. I'm going to spend a few minutes, though, talking about the OSC, Local Government Management Guide, that is seeking competition in procurement. because this is extremely valuable, especially now that the Office of the State Controller has gotten so involved in so many areas of purchasing. And this particular document talks about a number of very pertinent areas as to who's responsible for purchasing, how do you do competitive bidding, e-bids, which are, becoming the newest rage, cooperative purchasing, goes over state and county contracts, the procurement policies and procedures, professional services and insurance, preferred sources. And then there's something that I had neglected to put a slide on that I'm going to talk about for a couple of minutes, and that is another area where the state has gotten involved, and it affects purchasing, and it has to do with green purchasing. Everyone wants to be responsible for preserving natural resources, and certainly the state and school districts, I know individually, have been involved in their own ways for many, many years. In particular, there is one law, it's an education law, Section 409-I, as well as state finance law, Section 163-B, that actually talks about a mandatory requirement that schools get involved in buying environmentally sensitive cleaning and maintenance products. And those products are actually available under New York State contracts or through the New York State Office of General Services, because New York State got on the bandwagon and actually required that they get involved in that, so that they started to do that. And it provides another resource for people who are purchasing those commodities. So you actually can go on the New York State website, see what the green products are, and start to use them in your district. Now, you have to also realize that they have to be used by people who have to be trained on how to use them. All of those kinds of supplies and cleaning and maintenance are really something that can't be just thrown in a bucket and used. You have to use information that you get from the vendors, as well as the procedures you have in your own district to be able to deal with it. But it's, again, another way that the laws are being updated and changed and modified as we speak. And in a lot of cases, it's starting to be areas where we are very fortunate that they're starting to listen to some of the needs we're actually having and update based on those needs. I guess it's the new face of New York State. So I'm voting for that. That's my little blurb on interesting little things that are happening or statewide. We talked about this, and we're going back and forth because the laws really tap into so many different areas, and it's going to be, I think, very useful when we, on our next part of the journey, when we go into the processing of purchasing, that we need to start to see how these little things go together. But on these contracts that are based on public works, or as I like to think of them, the building and construction trades, there are two different areas there. Labor law discusses requirements for minimum wages and supplements to be paid for construction and building trade laborers in the particular county where the work is performed. So any specification that's put out for a bid that requires that's referencing, for instance, trash removal or delivery of fuel oil or concrete work, all of those bids have to have a reference that's acquired through the Department of Labor, which is yet another area that's now having a law that impacts on purchasing. And this has been going on for many, many years. Luckily, you can now go on the Department of Labor website and request a prevailing wage schedule supplement and have that downloadable within a very, very short amount of time. In the past, it had been a situation where you'd have to send a letter up to Albany. They would send it back to you. with the information that you required, and it would take weeks for you to get the bid done. Luckily now you have that instant access that the computer, the internet allows us to have. But the reality is that bidders are required to pay their employees at least the prevailing minimum wage, and it's the supplements that are indicated on that document that's sent to you as per Labor Law Section 220. Not only the employees of the awardee, but any subcontractors of that original contract holder are also subject to the requirements. And the school districts and other entities must collect certified payrolls, and by certified payrolls I mean a document that is actually individuals' names with their payment information. I can have redacted information on their Social Security and that sort of thing, but it's supposed to have their information as to what they were paid. And that information is supposed to be collected at the site of whoever the entity is who's the contract who's the originator of the contract, i.e. your school district. Now that brings up a question of, well, what do we do with that information? Well, it's gone back and forth, and it depends a little bit on who the person is at the Department of Labor that is speaking to you. But from what I've gleaned most of the time, the requirement is that we house the information, that we look at it, but that we not actually enforce it. We certainly could call the Department of Labor and say, hey, it looks like they're not paying the person the amount. But primarily, it appears that the Department of Labor wants a centralized location where they can go and look at the material. And if you think that they don't go and look at the material, you'd be guessing wrong, because they absolutely do. And I've had at least 2 or 3 instances in my career where they actually came in and found an employer to be not in compliance with the law, and they actually had the school district hold back payment to that vendor and even give it to DOL in order for the employees to be paid, because they have to be paid what is the appropriate amount of money. So they actively work on this all the time. This is a little bit of a, just to go over it as a recap. How do we determine whether to bid? We're going to be looking at group items, group-like items together. We're going to be looking at the aggregate cost of that purchase, whatever it happens to be, computer supplies, art supplies, science supplies, for the entire fiscal period, and now it seems even for a year from the initial purchase, which I'm going to read for the purposes of most of the annual contracts that school districts are involved in. Is going to be July 1 for most of them. We're talking there about the standard bid lists in districts like paper and art supplies and science supplies and the library supplies and home ec if you have it. There are a whole series of maybe 10, 12 basic areas of supply buying that almost every school district does on an annual basis. And as we go into process next time, we're going to really be talking about some of this in more detail. Looking at whether we're talking about $20,000 or more. And knowing that when you buy something, you're not only buying the widget or the computer disk, you're also buying the transportation costs on those disks. You may have heard sometimes when you're bidding something, well, there's no transportation. That's not technically true. When people are bidding, transportation needs to be included in the cost of the goods. So, in fact, everything has a transportation cost. So when you go to quote something, and you may not remember, I didn't make a big deal of this, but I'm going to go back just for a minute on that form that I had for quoting. There was a notation here, hopefully everyone can read, to remember to include shipping and handling costs. Vendors don't always remember, because if you say, I want to buy a time clock, they may not say, oh, and the delivery is going to be XYZ to you. You need to remember. I used to put it as a separate line on the listing, and then add that in before I made my final determination, because many times you're going to find that once you add in shipping and handling, that in fact the cost of what you thought was the low quoter is no longer the same person. And that goes for bids too. If a vendor does not put on their information that has not read your bid well enough to realize that they're supposed to give you shipping, their bid may not be viable, because they can't come back later and say, oh, by the way, that was $20,000, but I didn't put the shipping in, so now I'm going to charge you shipping. So that's not going to work. So, and of course, if this is a service installation or a public works contract, will it exceed $35,000? And will it exceed that $35,000 for the purchase of whatever that is going to be for the course of a year? You're not going to build a playground in one school with the intent to build 5 more and call it, a quote, because if it exceeds $35,000, which that very well may, you need to be able to have that as part of a purchase that was done according to the law and has the total aggregate cost of what it's going to cost to do it in the threshold that you need to deal with it. And of course, if that threshold is exceeded, you need to prepare bid documents, which is a whole nother talk. But I'm going to just touch on a couple of things with bid documents because there are legalities there too. Bid documents should have certain components. Here I'm just going through, and I'm going to do this briefly. A legal notice is a requirement, and that legal notice should be a part of any bid packet that's put together. There should be general conditions. There should be terms and conditions. The general conditions are kind of a boilerplate, and most school districts have them as a separate document that they kind of add to whatever their specific bid is. And then the terms and conditions I'm talking about now are specific to that particular purchase, whatever it happens to be, purchase or public work contract. A statement of non-collusion is a statement that the vendor is required to sign, and if it's not signed, you may not bring that bid to the board for award because it is not legal. That is a statement that they're saying that they did not collude with anybody else in doing the pricing. There should be a bid form where the prices are put. They should not be using their own forms and giving you a piece of paper that isn't comparable to what you had in the bid packet. They should be using your forms. And the specifications should be there detailing what it is that you're trying to buy. Legal notice is actually talked about in general municipal law. It contains the date and time of the bid opening, where the bid documents can be picked up, and a location for the bid opening. It has to take place at least 5 days before the opening of the bid, not including the day of the opening. But in reality, very few people bid that quickly. I mean, if you're under a whole lot of stress about getting that bid out there and making sure that it's done very, very quickly, I mean, you can do this, but common practice is to allow for at least 2 to 4 weeks from advertisement to bid opening so that vendors have enough time to be able to get the document, review it. Sometimes there's a requirement that they need to look at your premises. They need to have time to be able to do that and then ultimately respond and get it back to you before the date and time of the bid opening. Because once a bid is received, legally you can't take it if, once a bid is opened, you can't take a response that comes in even a second after the time that's indicated. Some of the things that general conditions refer to are how to handle eligible bids, bids received after the official opening date and time, samples that you might need in order to make a determination of whether something is comparable. We're going to go into more detail in a subsequent webinar about what is a specific description of the item and how you test to see if you're being met. The law requires that everything you put out there is really Crayola crayon or equal, so that it's up to the purchasing department to determine whether an alternative that's been offered to the school district is actually equal to what was being purchased or what was being put out specification-wise in either form or function, because the reality is we're not buying brands, we're buying the commodity, which is a crayon. How the award is going to be put out, you don't ever want to put a bid out and not indicate how the award is going to be done, whether it's going to be line by line or a total bid or a mixture of the two or neither. So you want to at least let the vendors know what basis something's being awarded upon. You need to have how the contract, once it's accepted, what are the requirements there and the delivery requirements. If there's any installation of equipment, you need to have that in there too. And again, it's usually boilerplate. It accompanies every bid, but you need to know what it says, because you need to know it's going to tell you what to do. For instance, if you have a problem with a vendor who doesn't deliver, it's going to indicate that most of them, if they're the boilerplate I've used in the past, most of them are going to indicate that you have the right to buy off the market and back charge the vendor. It's often nice, if you're having a delivery problem, to hold back payment to the vendor until you know for sure what your problem is, and then let them know in writing, because everything needs to be documented, that you're going to require that he pay the difference in price for you to get this item somewhere else. And then there's also going to be a clause for safety, and MSDS information is material safety data sheets, and that's really something that talks to toxicity in items, and people need to review when you're putting out something to bid what is coming back and whether that item coming back is toxic. I remember many moons ago I was buying something that we'd been buying for years and years. It had to do with ink for a machine, and when the material safety data sheet came back, it indicated that there were some tests done where the item was considered carcinogenic. And I brought it to the attention of the powers that be, and we had to change our entire methodology on how we did that, because it was a problem to have a carcinogenic item that could come in contact with skin in our schools. And unfortunately, even though there might be some ways of handling that with gloves or whatever, you really have to be sensitive to it and bring it to the people who you may not feel comfortable with it, but someone else in your organization is certainly going to be the person who's in charge of how to handle that sort of thing. Of course, your terms and conditions, this is what makes your bid specific to your bid, provides the additional information that's appropriate to that contract and includes the contract period, indicates delivery sites. Really important information. You need to tell your vendors that they may have a cost that's associated with where your delivery site is going to be. It outlines specifics for the contract at hand and details any kind of bid security requirements, which you see more prevalent in those contracts for public works or building services. And if a public works contract is what you're working on, it references the Department of Labor prevailing wage attachment, because you want to be able to tell people what it is that the minimum wages are. The bid form document is going to have a place for prices to be indicated. Usually there's an item number and a description and a category and estimated contract quantity and unit price, and then a total price. And as we get more savvy with computers, some more of that will be done on a Excel or some other program basis. Then on the bid form also is a place provided for the bidder's name, address, a signatory, a printed name, a title of the signatory, often a federal identification number that's useful for those public works contracts, telephone number, fax number, and email address if you need it. All of those can be entered on that form. Sometimes it's better to err on getting more information so that if you do need it, you have it. We'll be doing a lot more work on specifications, but that's really a kind of a description of what it is that you want to purchase with enough detail on it so that it is clear that you have certain standards that need to be met. You can put brand names down on it, and the understanding there is that you are accepting something that has the form, function, capabilities of that particular brand or equal. And you can't be so tight that you're only going to get this widget from this particular vendor at this particular location, because then you're really stifling the potential for competitive bidding, and you're not letting people who have something that they may have that's actually equal to or better, and they won't respond to your bid, and that will be a loss to you and your community. The statement of non-collusion must be signed by a company official, and they need to attest the bid pricing was derived independently and without bid rigging. Unsigned paperwork is grounds for bid disqualification, as I said before. But I will tell you that it's been my experience that the attorneys normally would say that that's the non-signing of a non-collusion form can be rectified. It's considered a problem that happened at the bid opening that can be changed before the documents are actually sent to the Board of Education for approval of a bid award, so that there is kind of a way out there if it looks like it's in the best interest of the school district. Even how you house the bids are really, it's a very important. Everything is very, very serious about bids. They should be kept in a place that's safe, that's away from a wandering eye, that doesn't have access to a file cabinet, for instance, would be good, or a safe. They should be time-stamped, recorded in a log until the appointed day and time when they're going to be publicly read, and you will be a member of the team that is going to be in the room that reads it if you're the purchasing agent. And usually you should take somebody else in your office so you can open the bids and read some basic information. You don't need to necessarily read every single point of pricing on the bid, but there may be people there who are vendors who are interested in the results, who want to know what the results were. And so you need to have information read that at least is the bidder's name, the price submitted in total, whether it's this non-collusive is signed, and if bid security is a requirement, and we will talk about bid security at a later date, if it's actually been received. We talked about this a little bit before. Electronic bids may be accepted as long as the Board of Education has approved a resolution to do so. Certified bid security may be in the format of a certified check, a bank check, or a bid bond. It should be kept in a safe place because you're really dealing with money that the vendor has put out to secure the fact that he is a responsible vendor and that his bid is should be actually looked at because he is responsible. And when you are finished with the analysis of bid, you have a responsibility to return the bid security of the unsuccessful bidders within a timely manner after the award to the successful bidder. And then ultimately, if the successful bidder does perform the way that they're supposed to, and there are no issues with their contract, you should return their bid security in a timely manner so that they receive those monies back. In analyzing a bid, and again, I'm just touching on some of the concepts here, award is made to the lowest responsible bidder meeting specifications. And we're going to go through a lot more on what that means because that's extremely volatile statement. Because you can have lots of reasons why the vendor is not lowest responsible bidder meeting specifications, and some of them have legal ramifications, and some of them have responses that have to do with the form and function of the material you're trying to buy. Usually a recommendation is made to the Board of Education, and they would receive information on who the awardees are, the number of items, the cost of the items, the number of no bids. Those are items that no one responded to, so they're still out there needing to be priced. Date of and location of the legal notice, and other specifics that the local Board of Education may require that you do in that district. That's almost a little different in every district that I can think of. Only the Board of Education, however, can authorize the contract. So even you as the purchasing agent don't have the authority to authorize that contract unless the board has ruled on it. And then after that, a purchase order may be released, and you're good to go. And that completes, the process of how you get from the items being determined to be needed to bid to the actual pricing on the items. So that's basically what I put together here for a foray into the world of the legalities of bidding. There's certainly lots more detail, but I'm certainly willing to address any questions that anybody may have, either now or later. My email should be out there. Matthew, is there...
Yep, if anyone has any questions, we do have about 10 minutes left. Please feel free to either type in the chat window your question for Angela, or you can go ahead and hit 7# if you want to speak with her over the phone. I'll give you a minute to go ahead and do that. Okay, again, if you have any questions you want to ask over the phone, that's 7#. That'll notify me of a question, then I'll put you through. Or you can go ahead and use the chat window located to the right of your screen. Okay, Angela, we have no questions. If anyone has any questions, after the fact, please feel free to email me. My number or my phone, my email address is on ASBO's website, nysasbo.org. I'll pass that right on to Angela. And the next webinar we have, Angela, with you, let's see, is on the 17th.
Yes.
So we will see you all there. Thank you very much, and have a great day.
Thank you, everybody.
The moderator has ended the conference. Goodbye. Thank you for calling.